Welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about how to solve a real-world problem using AI. So if this is your first opportunity to dive into AI, this should be a gentle introduction. We're going to be using Node and Express to create a simple server, and it's just going to have one endpoint, and it's going to listen for our a post request, and then it's going to handle that post request and send a response. And so the problem that I want to solve today is assuming you have some property data like this, like factual information about a home that's about to be listed for sale. You've got things like bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, recent upgrades, different features around the home, and your data might have different shape than this, but roughly something like this. Maybe you acquire data from some property data provider or API, and you have it here, or you're a real estate agent and you're about to list the property and you have all the factual information. Well, you can present it to AI and ask AI to write a property description almost as if a real estate agent wrote it themselves. And so this is a great example of a problem that AI should be able to solve, because we're just giving it some information and tasking it at generating text as in the form of an answer to a prompt. And so AI is really good at generating text. Okay, so before we get into the code, you'll need to open a OpenAI account. So you'll head over to OpenAI's website and sign up or log in if you already have an account. Once you're in, come over to your settings with this little gear, go over to API keys, and then create a new API key. And then you'll have one opportunity to copy that key. And so take that opportunity. Otherwise, if you miss it, you'll just have to delete the key and try again. So we're going to integrate that key right into our app and the environment variables. So let's get started. So I'm going to start by creating a directory. Let's call it listing magic. Alright, we'll cd into our directory. We're going to touch that .env file into existence. This is a way for us to manipulate what's in the environment, so long as we import the .env library, which I'll get to in a second. So actually, one of the things I like to do when I first start a project is just check which node version I'm using. So I use NVM as a node version manager. You just type NVM current, and it spits out the current version of Node that you're working with. And 20.18 is a pretty good one for today, so I'm gonna be using 2018. If you want, you can use 2018. If you don't, I mean, as long as it works, as long as the version that you choose works with the tools that we're using today, should be fine. I am using also PNPM for our package manager, and it should be a lot like Yarn. If you haven't used PNPM before, check it out. So we're going to get right into it, and we're going to write PNPM init. And that'll just create our package.json, and it's going to put this content right in there. Oh, I did a weird paste thing. All right, let's take a look. So we've got our .env file, and we've got our package.json. And now I'm going to enter VS Code to do the rest of the project. Feel free to use any IDE that you're comfortable with. VS Code is quite popular, so hopefully it wouldn't be anything new to most of you. And make everything bigger, make it full screen. Alright, we are going to open up the terminal yet because we have some more commands to write. We're going to add some dependencies like .env. And let's go ahead and add Express so that we can create our Express server. And I like to take small steps, so I want to go ahead and just create that Express server first and add a post endpoint and just ensure that that's working. So I'm going to just import Express. And I am working with GitHub Copilot today, so you'll see that it's making suggestions for me, and sometimes I will accept their suggestions. But you got to use your better judgment with that, because it's just a text completion algorithm, just like our OpenAI solution will be today. Okay, so I want to say that this Express app is going to use the JSON middleware, meaning that I expect to build basically a REST API. Although I'm only going to create one endpoint today, I basically expect JSON in the body of my requests, and I'm going to respond with JSON in the responses. So actually I'll be calling app.use, and we just specify that express.json middleware. Okay, now let's create a post endpoint, and I will just call this description. And our handler, let's see, I'll just accept that suggestion, but this isn't really what we want to do in our handler. Let's just respond with some JSON. So we'll say something like meaningless, like good equals good is true. And that will allow us to test this Express server and make sure everything's working. So we'll ask the app to listen on port 3000, and for our callback we'll go ahead and just write to the log, write to the console, server running on port 3000 sounds fine. And that's an Express server. Now, in order for us to use this ES module import expression, we have to specify that this is a module type JavaScript project. Okay, that's the last step before we give it a run. Address in use. That's right, I do have a version of this running. Let me just pause the video and terminate that. In fact, I'll just switch it to a different port. So I'll be working with port 3001. You can work with port 3000 or 3001, whichever works for you. If you want to follow along precisely, go ahead and change it to 3001. I'll come over here. I'll switch my post request to send it to localhost 3001. And we're hitting that description endpoint with post request. It really doesn't matter what the body of this request is right now, because it's just going to output the same thing every time. And there it is. Okay. Okay, so from here we will import our .env so that we have access to our environment variables. And now we're going to go into the .env file. Let's save this. One other thing you have to do to set up .env is just call .env.config, and that'll just ensure that every variable, environment variable that you define in this .env file ends up makes its way into the process.env object, where it simulates reading from the environment. So we're going to conveniently describe all of our, or define all of our environment variables here. For now, we just need one that will store the value of that OpenAI API key. So I'm going to call it OpenAI API key. And you can see it's predicting that maybe I want to write that, but that's way off base. So I'm just going to save it here. Then I'm going to pause the video, and I'm going to enter my actual key there, and I'll come back once that's all configured. All right, I have in my environment in my .env file the environment variable for the OpenAI API key, and so from here I have access to it under process.env. That's going to help us initialize our OpenAI SDK. So let's go ahead and stop the running server application for now and add another dependency. We'll go pnpm add OpenAI. So this will save us the trouble of actually writing HTTP requests to the OpenAI API, OpenAI has a convenient JavaScript SDK, so we're going to go ahead and reference the API documentations, but we're going to use the OpenAI SDK in order to access the pieces of OpenAI that we're going to use today. So let's import OpenAI from OpenAI. This is the constructor for a OpenAI instance. So we'll actually add another line here. And that completion isn't exactly correct. The OpenAI constructor takes this object of which one of the keys is API key. So that's what it'll look like. But if you come in here and you use your IntelliSense, you'll see that there are some other options, some other arguments that fit, or that this object could take. Today we're just going to keep it simple, and we're just going to specify the API key. Okay, so this will give us an instance of our OpenAI SDK. Now if we wander over to the documentation, this is what we're going to be using today from that SDK, is the completions object. So our interaction with OpenAI today is actually going to be to create a completion or to create a chat completion. And what that means is we're going to give OpenAI some prompts, and it's going to respond with whatever it would say next if this was a chat that you were having with OpenAI, with the AI model. So it lets you specify the model, and then it lets you send some messages. Now there are two types of messages that we have to be aware of, and one of those is system. And a system message to OpenAI is just to sort of preface OpenAI with the information that it would take to give a good answer to this kind of message, which is the user type message, which is the actual sort of question that you're asking OpenAI, or the prompt that you want it to respond to. So you can send an array of messages here, and you can deem some of them system messages and some of them user messages. And so the way we're going to use it today is we're going to specify a system message that tells OpenAI essentially that you are a real estate agent, and give some instructions for how to answer the question. And then the question is going to be the data that we have on that property. So I'll show you how that all works back in our IDE here. Okay, so this logic is going to go in the handler for the post request to the description endpoint. The first thing we want to do is consume the input. So if you look at our example, I'm suggesting that maybe our endpoint handles a JSON body that has an input field followed by, which refers to an object that has all the property data. So let's just go ahead and grab input as rec.body.input. So the body of the request has an input field. Now before we get too far, we've already made an assumption about what the shape of that request looks like. So I don't want to get into a position where I've coded the endpoint incorrectly and I'm not handling any potential errors. So I'm going to wrap all the logic for this endpoint in a try-catch, and we're going to send a 500 status HTTP response to our client if we run into any errors. So that'll just make me feel safe about lines like this where I write rec.body.input, where I'm making the assumption that the body will have this input. And we're working with JavaScript and not TypeScript, so we don't have the assurances that TypeScript offers here. Alright, so let's go into the completion part of using OpenAI's SDK. We're going to try and create a completion. So we're going to not take that recommendation. This is part of the OpenAI.chat.completions module. So we're going to call .create on that, and then we're going to open our argument object here and define it. I'm going to go ahead and accept the suggestion here. So it's suggesting that we send a message that is system role, and this just basically copies straight from their documentation, their example, suggesting this model. And actually, for our purposes today, for a simple text completion task, as we're giving it today, 3.5 GPT 3.5 should be fine. But the documentation does go over all the different models and what they're good for, so be sure to check that out. Alright, so we're going to send a system message that's actually more useful than this. This message almost feels like a given. So I'm gonna copy a message that I've already written as a system prompt. So we're gonna paste that here, and I'll go over it with you. So this system prompt says, you are a real estate agent. Write a compelling real estate property description that highlights the features, benefits, and lifestyle offered by the property. Use a professional, engaging tone designed to attract potential buyers. Include details about the location, key amenities, unique features of the property, and any recent upgrades or renovations. Only use information provided in the input. Ensure the description is no longer than 1,000 characters and avoids overly technical jargon. Information about the property will be provided in JSON format. So there's a couple of key points that this prompt makes. One of them being that we're telling OpenAI to expect the next input to be JSON. And that'll open the door for us to just go ahead and take that JSON, which OpenAI, which a large language model would be good at parsing, and expect the input to be in that format. The other thing is we put a character limit on it, which if you make this app extensible, you can allow that to be changed. That 1,000 right now is sort of behaving like a magic number. And I wanted to point out also that this prompt says explicitly only use information provided in the input. And so it's easy for a text generation task to get out of hand when you have when you start with all this information and it just starts spewing out content. It's possible for it to sort of deviate from the facts that are here and start to give false information. So we want to make sure that it stays constrained to the input and realistically describes this property. Okay, so we're going to leave that message alone now, and we're going to take a look at the next message, which is the question or prompt that we're asking OpenAI. And here it's taking the input, which is actually the JSON object or the JavaScript object that embodies the input. And so it doesn't actually, it's not the correct shape or the correct type to be putting here. And so fortunately, we've caught it now, so we can correct that. I'm going to take that input and just convert it right back to string. So Express did the work of parsing this into an object for us, but I just want to make it a string because I know OpenAI is able to read that JSON directly, and I don't really need to modify it to make this work. Okay, so we have asked OpenAI to create a completion. Now this is actually a async operation, and so we're going to have to wait for it to return with that completion. Now, of course, because that's a network call, so we have to send it out, send the request, and wait for the response to come back. When we get the response back, then we'll move on to the next instruction, which will be to actually capture that description. So let's name a variable for our description. And Copilot got pretty close here. So completion doesn't have a .data field. It's actually completion .choices. And I'll just go ahead and erase this so we can look at IntelliSense as we go. We got our choices. And I'll speak about this just shortly. We're going to pick choice 0, and then we've got message, and then we've got content. Okay. Y choice is 0. So for this completion, there will only be one choice, but this argument object allows for a field called n, which is the number of completions that you want to create. So actually you can ask OpenAI to make, for instance, 3 completions, and then you can pick the one that you like best. But in our case, we're keeping it simple, so I'm not going to specify n, and it's going to remain at its default value of 1. And that means our choices array will have one element, and that element is element 0. And so we'll grab the message from element 0 and we'll save it under the description variable. Now we just need to respond. So we're going to call rest.json and give a JSON response. We'll just put description, and it's going to point to the description string that we extracted here. And this will also give a 200 response, since I didn't specify a status code. Okay, so we've significantly upgraded our post handler. Let's just start the application, start the server on port 3001, and then we'll try our request again. So instead of returning this payload, it should hopefully take this input, send it over to OpenAI, along with the prompts that we've asked it to read, and output our lovely property description. Okay, this looks good. So it says, nestled in a peaceful, charming cul-de-sac of Indianapolis, this exquisite single-family home offers serene retreat close to schools and parks. It's got the 3-bed, 2-bathroom. It's got the square footage. It has information about the countertops and the stainless steel appliances. But as you can see, this sounds exactly like what a good real estate agent could create. But, I mean, it took a couple of seconds, whereas a real estate agent would have to sit down and look at all the factual information and turn that into a nice little blurb. So you can see where AI has saved a lot of time in this process. Now we want to make sure to test our prompt engineering in this case, because we gave it this instruction, and we want to make sure that it's always going to write something that is compelling and is actually helpful and useful in selling a property. So one step that we can do in order to verify that we gave a good sort of preface prompt is to change some of this information such that OpenAI sort of has to work against negative information about the house. So let's take this location information and change it to, instead of quiet, charming cul-de-sac, let's say loud, bustling, intercity chaotic neighborhood. Right, so at face value, this doesn't sound very good in terms of what people might be looking for in a home, but we're entrusting OpenAI to sort of come up with a selling description despite that. So let's go ahead and send the request again and see what it comes up with. Okay, so we're looking for any kind of, so here it says located in a bustling neighborhood close to schools and parks, so it just says bustling neighborhood. This home offers the perfect blend of convenience and community. So it's highlighting that you get to experience the community. Let's see what. Oh, this time mentions vibrant lifestyle. Yeah. So yeah, it tries to make the best of the situation. And of course, if you need further tweaking, that's where you'll come back and adjust this system message, or provide different message altogether, more than one system message. But yeah, there it is. So that's all I have for you today. So we successfully built an AI-powered property description generator. We used OpenAI's API, and we solved a real-world problem in it. It clearly is something that can save user time. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment if you have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on future tutorials.